Good evening and welcome. Welcome to this Friday edition of the Angela Ray Show. I hope that you all have had a great week. And of course, right about now, it's the weekend, baby. Actually, some of you probably started your weekend early as the 4th of July falls on a Saturday. So many of you had today off. I know I saw a lot of my friends saying that they were sleeping in on this Friday. So if you are watching the broadcast on the replay, thank you so much for checking out the Angela Ray Show. This week has been all about wellness. And we started off the week talking with Devin Choke, who talked to us about the Healing Kitchen. And then we moved on to Miss Effie, who talked to us about our lymphatic system, about breast health, as well as the benefits of body work. On Wednesday, it was Miss Nasha Chandri, and she spoke with us about ways that we can center ourselves through meditation and through breath work. And if you missed that broadcast, of course, you missed the preview of what is to come, which may be trap aerobics. We don't know, trap aerobics or trap yoga. We talked about both of those. So we'll see if that actually comes to fruition. And then on last night, I had a representative from the faith community, Pastor Vince Thomas Jr. from the Outlet Community Church in Atlanta, Georgia, who talked to us about the spiritual aspect of wellness. And so tonight we round out this conversation on wellness with the psychologist. So, if you are checking out this broadcast live, do me a favor. Number one, when you get on the broadcast, go ahead and jump in the comments. Let me know where you are watching from tonight. And go ahead and share the broadcast with someone. Share it on your social media pages. You can tag some of your friends and loved ones in it, especially someone who you think may benefit from this information. As we've been talking about all week, this has been a very challenging time for so many people for various reasons. Obviously, many people in the world are suffering financially. For those who are married and have children and are working at home and are trying to take care of their children, life is different at home. And there are challenges that come from all of a sudden having those home dynamics change. For those individuals who are living alone, who are in isolation, many of those individuals may be facing depression, particularly as they try to follow the CDC guidelines of social distancing and only going out when it is absolutely necessary and for those essential trips. So there are so many different reasons why people may be going through. Obviously, there are many individuals, as indicated by the numbers, who are actually have been affected directly by the pandemic, whether they are fighting the virus themselves or they have loved ones in their families who are fighting it and or surviving. And then there is a segment of people who have lost loved ones during this time, whether it was directly related to the pandemic or losing them from other causes and illnesses. However, because of the CDC guidelines, mourning and bereavement has taken on a very different look than it did just 3 or 4 months ago. So we want to talk. We want to see how we can better handle what we are in right now throughout the world. Yes, it is Friday Fun Day, Edwin. Yes, it absolutely is. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started with the first part of our broadcast, and that is our Ray of Motivation moment. So I just want to ask you the question. Are you saying yes? Are you saying yes? So often, many of us find ourselves saying yes or overcommitting ourselves to things that really don't align with balance in our lives. Oftentimes, we find ourselves with a to do list that can never get too done. However, on the flip side of that, in terms of saying yes, many times we are not saying yes to the things that will elevate us, take us to the next level, whether that's in our personal life, personal development, spiritual life, or even our careers. Sometimes we're presented with opportunities that little voice within may question whether or not we are ready. And I promise you, life gets so much more interesting when you take a step outside of your comfort zone. So, for our Ray of Motivation moment for this Friday evening, I just want to encourage you to say yes to the right opportunities. And that is your Ray of Motivation moment. Well, I am really excited to welcome my guest for tonight. She is a clinical psychologist, she is a mindset consultant, and she is a liberation theologian. She has a practice in Greensboro, North Carolina. I have known this young lady for a number of years, but this is the first time that we've had an opportunity to collaborate in this manner. So I'm really excited to have on the program tonight my soror, Dr. Vanessa Abernathy. Vanessa, welcome to the Angela Ray Show.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for just consistently supporting me on and off the camera.
Oh, you are absolutely
It's
welcome.
always been mutual.
Yeah, it has. Absolutely. Absolutely. So I'm just curious. There are many of us who feel like we know what we want to do from the moment we step on a college campus. Sometimes there are people who take a class and all of a sudden everything that they thought they thought they were going down a path and it just completely changes. For you, why did you get involved with psychology?
I'm laughing because psychology I started North Carolina Central University here in North Carolina as a psychology major. I was going to practice family marital therapy and then also go to law school and do divorce law. I was like, if I couldn't help you on the front end, I'll help you on the way out. But the psychology class was the worst thing because it was a huge class. There was this big disconnect. It was all theory. There was nothing personal. There were no case studies. And it was boring and almost common sense. So it was really a turnoff. So for me, I switched later when I met you, when we were in faith community together. I was a leader. I was an associate pastor, so youth pastor, Christian education, but also I was a public school teacher. And what really prompted me to move into psychology is I saw how education could liberate, how education could change your status, your trajectory in life. But there was still something missing because I was teaching siblings by this time, and they were bright, but they had the spiritual component because I knew them at church and at school. But when I saw some of the psychosocial, emotional, and interpersonal things that were interfering with all of that, I knew there was something else that was missing. So that was the one piece. The second is that I was doing some pastoral counseling in that role, and I only had one person that I could really make a solid referral to in the community where people's faith claims could be taken into consideration, but it was not pastoral counseling. So I figured I needed to be one of those people that people could be referred to.
Okay.
So that was it. So it was the young people and just knowing my limits and knowing that there were just too few people where there was a balanced approach to faith and mental health.
Now, you have a practice in Greensboro, North Carolina,
Yes.
and during this time, I know I have seen cries come out, if you will, on social media, whether that's through a post and, wondering if people are okay. What have been some of your challenges that you've seen as a therapist during this time as a direct result of the pandemic?
So I see people of all ethnic, sexual, gender, nationality. I mean, I was trained in California. You can't get more diverse than that. But what I see two different things. So one, I see a lot of the fact that people aren't recognizing the signs of distress and trauma. They're not recognizing that the disturbance of their sleep, they're sleeping too much or they're sleeping too little. They're having trouble falling asleep, staying asleep. Because part of the things we don't realize is that when there's a pandemic, that is a traumatic event. Everything changes. It can affect your sense of worldview, your sense of self. And when we're sleeping, our brain continues to try to problem solve. So not recognizing that. And then when you're quarantined, the days run into nights. And I don't know if you've ever been exposed to a baby who had their days and nights turned upside down, but it's very disorienting. And so we're feeling our rhythms are turned off. And sleep, when you have sleep disturbance, everything is impacted. So that's one way that they could also improve. But low mood, changes in their sex drive, their appetite, they're eating either too much things, sweets, and also taking in too many substances, like misusing substances. So then there's alcohol and cannabis, which are depressants, right? So some people may take those just to take the edge off, but because we can't dose them and because they cut off the natural feel-good chemicals in the brain, we end up going lower than we really wanted to go. So those are just a few things that I see. And then with people of color and people who are marginalized, they're feeling the constant threat for their own safety and the safety of their loved ones. So they don't go where they typically felt safe to go. And that fear becomes very, very real.
Hmm. Well, aside from the actual disease, many people have felt isolated during this time. I know personally, I know individuals who have committed suicide. We've seen it in the news,
Mm.
in addition to me watching people post online of individuals in their circle who have taken their own lives. If people feel, there's someone who may be listening to this live or may hear this or watch it on the replay, if they feel alone, isolated, or
Mhm.
depressed, what are some things that they can do?
Well, one is to know that this is not a matter of strength or weakness, it's a health issue. If a person had a cold or cancer, we wouldn't say they were weak or lazy or needed to have more faith. We would encourage them to get some support from a healthcare provider. So, one thing I would say is don't wait to feel it because it's not about our emotion. With depression, our mood goes down. And so it can look different in adolescents and some adults. For some of us, it's agitation, it's irritability. It's not that slowing down and slow movement. Sometimes it's more aggression, more outbursts. So they can, one, not wait to feel it. They can choose to do something about it. They can reach out to someone. They could tell their medical, their primary care doctor. But even in their own, sometimes just getting up, getting out of bed, putting on real clothes. When you put on real clothes, even if you're not going anywhere, dressing for yourself, that can help you. You want to look at your nutrition, try to stay away from those high sugar, because things like sugar and caffeine, those are stimulants that take you way up, but then they can crash you. The other thing is actually having a release, sometimes through exercise, through movement, through dance, through art. But really, if you're having any thoughts of death by suicide, that is an indication of a brain that may not be in an unhealthy, it may not be in a healthy state. So that is to be taken seriously. And even if someone tells you and you're thinking, oh, they just want attention, give them the attention and take action and support them in taking action. They may go to their nearest emergency room or call 911. And you can help them too by calling the police, and they might do a wellness check. They do that.
Yeah, okay. Now, you are a liberation theologian. How would you describe, from that perspective, the connection between wellness and prayer?
So I always tell people I'm a liberation theologian whose aim and focus it is to transform systems that oppress people such that they might rise from surviving to thriving. And when we look at it from a systemic place, you really need prayer, because when you look at even some of the changes we've seen in the last few months, a lot of these have been there for generations, and they have been cosmic forces, no less. So you need a both and. So as a liberation theologian, the way that I understand prayer, liberation is about transformation, and prayer is about collaborating and exchanging with the divine. So even in the Greek, the word prayer really means to exchange wishes. So this is what we think about our situation, but this is what God, or Allah, thinks about the situation. So when you pray, you're having a divine exchange. And I know you're a football fan. I went to Duke, you went to Carolina. But one of the things we recognize about football, you have the people on the field and they have one perspective, but there's always a great coach up in the box who has a higher perspective, who can see the field, who can see where the openings are in the pockets and can see further down. And that's what happens in prayer. There's a divine exchange. So you get to know what God's wishes are, but then also God imparts faith, a divine preference in your heart. And that's really what happens. When we look at the civil rights movement, there were, Martin Luther King talked about transformation. Even the Black Panthers talked about wellness. There's always a connection. You can't have one without the other. Mrs. Rosa Parks did yoga and she lived to be 91. So I think a lot of times as activists in our social liberation, we forget the self and we have to honor ourselves because we are the agents of change.
Now, you mentioned just earlier, like if people need, or if they're feeling suicidal, or they need some extra support, they can reach out to maybe their medical doctor. For those who may be financially strapped, but they need support, they need to talk to someone, and maybe they don't have any, maybe they're not connected with a church where they have someone on staff or some type of counselor. What are some ideas for those people who really need some help and support right now?
Well, I have to acknowledge, first of all, that's my own privilege, right? To have access to those things. But my early training and still some of my volunteer opportunities are with community mental health places. There are places literally that are equipped with highly trained, highly skilled clinicians and support persons who will see you on a sliding scale based on income. I have literally sat across the room with people who did great work in therapy and they paid $1. They paid $5 because that's what they had. And there are people who will work with you. In my own practice, I try to reserve 10% of my caseload for those who need to be seen on a sliding scale based on income. And there are countless places. There are also places, nonprofit organizations. And sometimes if you can just connect with like-minded people who share your values and who can hear your pain, they may not have to agree with it. Pain just needs to space to be processed. If we try to ignore it, it's like that little kid that will throw a tantrum and pull you off of your focus. But that child warrants the attention so that he can get up and get going and you both can go to a different place.
Now, one of our very loyal viewers here, the Angela Ray Show, Edwin, has a great question.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, yes, yes. I love that question. So, yes, people of color and a lot of people of different backgrounds, because here's the truth, and this is, I learned this when I went to school, is that there's an inherent value when it comes to psychology, especially Western psychology. And so what I do is I help people integrate their faith claims where it's important for them. And the reason being is if you were in a relationship, let's say your sister or your brother or your cousin was your best friend, and we never talked about that person, that gives you the indication that that is not welcome. That part of you is not welcome. And so this is just another diversity issue. That's what faith is. And so for me, I have people who come in and this is the first time they've ever actually gotten in touch with the anger they feel towards God. And we might have to go to that part. And if you're in a Judeo-Christian, especially Christian tradition, we might have to go to the Old Testament where you can read about David shaking his fist at God and talking about dashing his enemies to the stones. My therapist in California of 9 years, she was Jewish, and she helped me to really get in touch with that. And so a lot of times people tell me things that they've never told anyone, and especially related to their faith, because for certain people, certain cultures, our faith is sacred, but we took it without any, it was more religion and less relationship. If you're really in a relationship with someone, and I hope that our God can handle really relating to us. And a lot of people move from those rigid roles, and we help them to look, is this a regular part of your life? Are there any spiritual disciplines you might engage in? But what are some of the early wounds? I always look, is your faith a risk or is it a resource? And how can you reclaim those pieces of your relationship history or your religious history and your relationship with God that can really be redemptive and move you forward instead of keep you stuck? Because a lot of times we put things on God that had nothing to do with God. And the same thing with psychology.
Yeah. Now, this beautiful young lady who's commenting right here, I'm thinking she's sharing a resource with us. Don't we love it when mamas
Yay!
just chime
I
on to
know. Look, I
support?
see my face. That's support.
Definitely. Now,
Yes.
what can families do during this time to really support each other in wellness? Because as I was mentioning earlier, before I brought you on, the dynamics are so different now for people who are working at home, who are trying to make sure that their children are taken care of, especially the ones with younger children, in addition to making sure the house is taken care of.
My
This
goodness.
is stressful. I just saw, I was watching the news just last night, which I don't watch the news a lot, but I've been watching it a little bit more lately, where they did a study on how many people, particularly people who are in relationships. I think the statistic was 29% said the pandemic made them better. I can't remember the percentage where they said it stayed about the same, but 7% said it had led to divorce already. So I know that it is definitely impacting. What suggestions do you have for families, how they can improve their wellness?
Well, I think one thing, and you mentioned divorce, all the research shows that couples that really last a lifetime have that balance of togetherness and distance. And if you are an introvert, which means you really gain your power and you recharge from within, it's probably you're ready to pull your hair out by this time. If you're an extrovert, you really get your energy, your recharge from being around other people. That can cause distress as well. And so you may have to first be realistic and recognize the capacity of the people in your home and get what you need in other places that are appropriate and aren't going to disrupt your relationship. Right? Because come on, some are approved and
Yeah,
some
I was listening. I was like, wait a minute now.
okay. Okay. Decent and in order. But the other thing is that we have to realize it's helpful to just listen, to use I statements. I tell people to use I statements. I feel this when you do that. You're not using your perspective, your judgment, or your beliefs. You're just saying how you felt. If you say, I felt this, I felt like you didn't care. If you say, I felt and use the word like after it, the next word you're going to say is not an emotional word. So you're probably going to pass some judgment. And we're having all kinds of feelings. And we have to realize that people can't read our mind. So not only is divorce going up, but domestic violence, child abuse, physical, sexual, all those. Because if I'm a person and I get my identity and my self-worth from what I do outside the home, what I make, and I'm laid off and there's all these uncertainties and I don't manage change and uncertainty well, that distress can make me rageful. And I might take it out on the person that's right there, my wife, my husband, my partner, my children, or even my elderly loved one. It's important to have respite care for people who have
Oh,
young
yeah.
children or caring for older people, but also taking those precautions to keep our older community members, family members safe. Um, but as far as coping, just using the other side of your brain, because remember I said your brain is constantly problem solving right now. What is there to do? What can I do? I feel hopeless. How can I really be part of the revolution? Well, self-care is a part of the revolution. Self-care is resistance. So if you can use the other side of your brain, not that part that's problem solving all the time, but that creative side, that side that you are very well versed in now, the singing, the dancing, the acting, painting, drawing, scribbling, chalk drawings, um, creating a garden, even if it's in your home in a small space, doing something that makes you present in your body, things you can smell, see, taste. Because the more you engage life within your five senses, the more present and grounded in the moment you're going to be, and less in the future with all the unknowns. What if this? What if this? What if this? Which really intensifies symptoms of anxiety.
So I want to go back to something you said. You mentioned respite care. I'm familiar with what it is, but I'd love for you to elaborate on that, number one. And number two, during this time of the pandemic, where is safe respite care? Because of course I know the most of the guidelines say, you stay with the people that you stay with. You don't break quarantine, go into other people's homes right now. And I think some of that's been relaxed and people are, maybe doing it with masks and the shields. I've seen people that have felt like they haven't hugged their elderly loved ones, so they've been doing it like through plastic, trying to keep it safe.
Mhm,
But if you
mhm.
have suggestions on respite care during this time where people can do that safely, I'd love for you to share those.
Okay, I'm looking down, making a note so I don't talk too much. One thing is, so my grandmother is one of my best friends. Anybody who knows me knows how I feel about my grandmother. We have a standing date, phone date every Sunday. So a couple of weeks ago, we went to visit her, but we had to prepare ourselves. We had to check ourselves. We had to examine, have we been quarantined? Have we had any symptoms? If we had an opportunity for testing, did we take it? I spoke with the medical doctor last week who said that it really is recommended. It'd be helpful if everyone would get tested. And I know, the different sites have different things because it's a way to map the disease and protect the people who are most vulnerable that we may be in contact with. But I think as a family, you have to, one, try to share the load with the family first if you can. So if you know other family members have been quarantined, you make very targeted steps to communicate with their healthcare providers and figure the safest ways you can go in. My grandmother was totally okay with the fact that we had on masks when we walked in. She put on hers at first. We didn't hug her. And my grandmother would kiss you right here. Okay. I'm gonna tell you, she gives the best hugs and she will kiss you. But we didn't kiss her and we didn't hug her because that was our way of caring for her. But then when we think about, those who are caring for her, if we can find ways to rotate in and out in a safe, you don't have to go in and be there all day. If you go in and do laundry, if you go in and take out the trash, if you go in and change their bedding, things that you can do safely, it makes a difference. The second thing is you might have to redefine family in this season. And I think that's one of the long term effects of all this. You might have to do what one of my college student clients said, family, because there are some friends that are more family, and we have to be honest. We
Hmm.
have to be honest. And especially in faith communities, we got to realize God cares about how we treat each other. So if you can find a creative way to be present, just do it or ask them, how can we help? How can I support you? And the other thing is, if you're the person, usually the caregiver, have a running list. Like I have a daddy do list. So if my father or my stepfather came and they ask me anything, or if they show up, I have something for them to do to help me out. So if you're the caregiver, it's okay. It's not about strength or weakness. Have a list and delegate things. And don't ask anybody more than twice. If they say no, ask someone else. Because when it gets done, they have a check within themselves that says, wow, I really could have done that. And maybe they could, and maybe they can't. And sometimes it's hard for them to even see the relative in that state. And that's something that other people might support them. So they may not be able to come over and see grandma, through the shield, because I don't want to see her in a nursing facility, but I can do her laundry. I can prepare her home before she comes, whatever it is that she needs me to do. Or
Awesome.
he. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right, we got another question from Edwin.
These days, there seems to be a pill for everything, advocate of medication. Okay. So I'm going to give you my basic elementary cartoon description of medication. So here's the thing. When you experience something that doesn't agree with you, it's going to come when you eat something that doesn't agree with you, it's going to come out one of two ways, Edmund. Okay. But if you experience something that doesn't agree with you, it's not just going to go away all the time. It may need to be processed and really laid out in the open, because if not, it's going to come up in the most inappropriate times, inappropriate ways, and threaten everything else that you have, that you care about. And the thing about it is we are born with so many chemicals in our brain that allow us to kind of pick ourselves up and to kind of recover and to recharge. But when you have been in a chronic state of distress, right now, I'm really, really praying about people of color and people who are marginalized in this nation, because those chemicals are being depleted. Okay, so you can have all the Black power you can, but if those chemicals aren't there, it may, and my practice is usually, let's work through this, because emotion has motion. It's moving all over your body. It moves in your shoulders, your stomach, and your brain. And sometimes instead of it, staying all in there, moving around, you talk, it comes out and it moves. So talk therapy can be helpful, exercising, all those things. But when we haven't seen that kind of uplifting in about 4 or 5 sessions, then it is my practice to refer you to someone who may have a conservative approach, usually not a primary care, no offense, because their specialty isn't the brain, right? We all have some level of expertise. But if you go to someone who has a conservative approach to medication, they're not going to be quick to prescribe. And if they do, they're going to start with a low dose and they're going to go back and forth with you. They should not write you a prescription and you go for 3 months. Okay. Red flag number one. And then 2, they should be able to listen to what you say, the nuances of how that's affecting you. So yes, medication can be helpful in helping you restore, because here's the thing. If you're coming in and you're talking about the current racial unrest, but you have histories and generations of family trauma, you've been through trauma, abuse, or neglect. When we start to open that up, if you don't have the chemicals in your brain to help you maintain homeostasis and that sense of health, you're going to go lower than you may have ever wanted to go or may have ever been. So sometimes it's helpful to have that before and while we're doing the work, because we can't talk chemicals back into the brain. Now, sometimes those chemicals are released with exercise and sex, even if it's not good. But there are ways, all right, and nutrition and things like that. Okay. So thanks for asking that. He asks great questions.
He does. We got another question as well from our YouTube viewers.
Oh, look, that's one of my great friends. All right. How do we as parents help our kids through this normal, yes, or virtual life without school socialization and fend off depression? Excellent question. One thing that you can do is it's really helpful to talk to children. You can mirror their feelings. Sometimes they don't know what they're feeling. So you might see them feeling a certain way and you say, you seem this, give them language, because emotional vocabulary really is the currency for all relationships, even with ourselves and with God. So one, giving them language, mirroring it, normalizing their feelings. First, just listening and not fixing. The second is helping them to find creative ways to connect, and sometimes and helping them to be clear why it's important that we can't connect in the same way. A lot of times our children need that socialization in ways that we can't even relate to. But talking to them about the truth. One of the things about trauma is it shifts, it affects our narrative, and depending on their age, kids often blame themselves or one person for things that could happen, even traumatic, depending on their age. So if you can help them to put themselves in this grand story and give them a narrative that they can move forward, then that can be helpful as well. There's a whole nother time about the impact of trauma on children. That really is an area of my early training and experience that is real dear to my heart. So yeah. And just normalize. If they say, I feel sad, oh, don't do that. Come on, you're a big boy. Definitely don't want to do that. There's some things I feel sad. Yeah. Anybody would feel that way. Normalizing that for them, because the stigma and the shame associated with mental health is really killing us.
Definitely. What is one thing that maybe we all could do to increase our overall wellness?
Well, can I offer something that we could do particular to right now?
Okay.
Because one thing you could do is limit your exposure. There, in the Christian tradition, it says faith comes by hearing and hearing, right? Well, fear comes the same way. Unfortunately, we live in a nation, fortunately or not, where the media is governed and sanctioned in different ways. There is some picking and choosing. And you notice there aren't many stories of people who have recovered. Now, in my life personally, I know people who in other states who were diagnosed, but they're living and they're well. I mean, from a coma to living and well, from being almost intubated and living and well. But that doesn't make money and that doesn't drive politics. Okay. So you have to be mindful of that. Turn it off. Unless you're an intercessor and you're praying the news, I would not watch it more than once a day, because if anything important happens, you're going to get an alert on your phone or somebody who loves you will call you. Okay. The
Right.
other thing is, as a person of color in this racial unrest and that pandemic, sorry about that, um, you are constantly being exposed to the real threat of harm to you and people who look like you. And one of the things of acute distress disorders, like the precursor to post traumatic stress, it talks about the re experiencing of the trauma. It's on social media. Pick one or two media outlets and reputable ones. You might do World Health Organization or CDC, CNN. I don't know what your flavor is, but listen to that and stay away from the sensationalism and recognize that even as a soldier in this army of civil justice, um, it's okay to look away from the battle, care for yourself, and go back and fight another day. You can look, especially when it comes to sleep, you can be woke and still get a good night's sleep. I'm just saying.
Okay, I'm gonna have to tweet that one. You can be woke and still have a good night's sleep. That's a
Come on,
tweetable.
come
That's
on.
a tweetable,
That's how,
Dr. V.
that's how you get into that strange, the friendly fire. Those soldiers who were sleep deprived.
Yeah.
Yes, stay woke and get some sleep.
Now, what is one thing that you think people maybe, and this is a generalization, people are maybe doing that's really hurting their wellness? And I don't know if that is almost the same thing as they're watching television too much or watching updates. But is there one thing that you think a lot, by and large, most people are doing and it's really hurting their wellness?
Well, I think that um, we're ignoring the impact of nutrition. Um, when I was in grad school at Duke, we had an opportunity to go on a travel study seminar, and we found out maybe halfway in that it was sponsored by Palestinian Christians. So there was a slant to our trip. And there was this person, he was bragging about how many babies, like we had driven through Palestine in some really high, dense areas that were filled with trash and just some very unsanitary conditions. And he was bragging about how many children were born in that year. And I'm thinking, what does it matter if you have more soldiers if those soldiers are not healthy, if they're malnourished, if they're not getting the same type of opportunities? So it's important to look at nutrition, what we put into our body. And unfortunately, a lot of us, from cultures where our ancestors had little to nothing and literal food trash was thrown to us, and we creatively found something to make out of it, we're still eating it, right? We're still eating a slave diet, and we're not doing the slave amount of manual labor. So we're packing it on, and it's increasing our blood pressure and things like that. So it's important to look at nutrition. What am I eating? What am I drinking? Am I even getting enough water? Am I nourishing myself? And I think because when people come in and I ask them, what's your food like, or what are you, consuming, like caffeine and alcohol and things like that, we're not thinking about it, but our mood, our appetite, our sex drive, our sleep are all interrelated. You can't address one part and not address the other.
Mm.
So, yeah, food can make you depressed.
We got another question for you.
It's to pursue mental health. What advice do you have for young people interested in my field? I love it. We need so many people, and I imagine, I don't know, I can't assume what his ethnic background is, but I would encourage them to read. Just no, I would encourage them to talk to somebody who's in the field, and not an apprentice situation where they're actually able to practice with them, but they're able to get some direction. Because here's the thing, what I would have them to do is think about, who do you want to serve on the other side of the room? So that's one thing, because mental health is about people. It's not about knowledge, right? The second thing is I would encourage them to have an encounter where they've been on the other side of the room. Some of the best mental health providers are people who have been on the other side of the room, because we have to be aware of ourselves. If I'm the tool in the room, there has to be some awareness. I remember the first time I was invited to a genogram where we actually map out the generations in our family, like the relationship patterns, the health issues, the mental health issues. My goodness, it shook me to the core. I was like, I didn't realize this ran in our family. That would have helped me with some of my dating relationships. And so it's important to know yourself in context, to be on the other side of the room and think about, who do I want to serve? Who are those people that I really want to sit with and go to school for? Because you're really going to school to serve other people.
That is great advice. So, as we get ready to wrap this up, what do you think the long-term impact is going to be from a spiritual standpoint and a wellness standpoint from what we are experiencing during the pandemic?
Um, First of all, I'd say I appreciate a question like this because it allows me. So, therapy, psychology is about science, but it's also an art. And it allows me to, speak as an integrated person. So, one, I think that this is a natural time for a lot of audits, relationship audits. If there's anybody you've been thinking about cutting off, you might want to graciously do that now. One, you said it in your array of
Area
array.
motivation?
Yes, your ray of motivation. I saw it across my mind. Your ray of motivation moment. If you know what your yes is, when something comes to you as an opportunity, if it doesn't align with your yes, it's not personal. It's just not in my personal budget. Okay. So if you think about it, there's some relationship audits. People are coming to terms with what really matters. They're not looking, because we're in crisis mode, right? And you want to then think about thriving. What's going to make me feel more alive, more loved, more loving? And then can I identify those things that are making me feel less alive or less loving, less loved, and sucking the life out of me? So that's one thing. The other, they're choosing relationship over religion. They're looking at the things that have been keeping them outside. One of my favorite folk singers was Keith Green, and he had a song talking about how Christians have been asleep in the light. A lot of the churches that are now moving outward, they're serving cities, they're winning the hearts of cities. Even in psychology, if you cannot address the basic needs of people, their eating and their sleeping, their education, they can't hear you. Their brain is being hijacked by, hey, I got other things to do to just survive. So the churches that are doing that holistic care, that makes the gospel more attractive. The other thing is, I think people are tapping more into their spiritual disciplines. Research shows that people who engage in regular spiritual disciplines tend to have overall better outcomes in their health and wellness, physical and mental. So that is definitely. And the other thing is, there's a song that says there's a storm out on the ocean and it's moving this away. If your soul's not anchored in Jesus or God or love or whatever it is that's bigger than you, you will surely drift away. And so you have to anchor yourself in a larger narrative to find meaning. That's what the people did after the Holocaust. There had to be a greater meaning. And so people are not majoring in minors anymore. If it's not serving the overall good, because the only way we're going to get through both these pandemics is unified, which means even with couples, if there's a fire that breaks out in the middle of our circle, we're not going to turn and go different ways to figure out how can I protect myself. No, we're going to turn and face that fire and put it out together. And that's really the move. And so it may be a little less churchy, but it's definitely more kingdom minded. Definitely more kingdom minded.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, as we wrap up, do you that seemed like the clincher to me, but I'd still like to offer an opportunity if you have any final thoughts. Do you
I
have a
don't. Maybe
book?
there's a.
Is there a webinar or a
Okay.
seminar that you have coming up? Things like that.
Okay. So, yes. So, one of the things that I'm offering for those, so I just shared with the community of real estate investors last night. And so it was targeted towards them, but it's also for other people who are entrepreneurs or have a clear purpose in mind. And they're figuring out, how can I find meaning in the midst of everything? I do have a training for that. My focus right now, I'm getting a lot of speaking opportunities so that I can take my clear message, because one of the things that I'm really passionate about are women of faith who may be in high power positions, which means they usually have to be very private about what's really going on with them. They may be married to someone who's high profile, or they themselves may have a really big name. um, or they're in Hollywood or whatever. So I get these opportunities because people have to realize that, like I said, people tell me things that they've never told anyone, and if they think I'm going to tell someone else, they're not going to share. And so unfortunately, that's where the church has gone wrong. In the name of prayer, we've been gossiping and we've been tearing people down and misusing people. So what I do is I create a safe space for women who may be survivors of deep relationship injuries, like narcissistic abuse, emotional abuse, financial, spiritual, infidelity, same-sex infidelity. I mean, things that really attach themselves to the core of who you are. And so right now, speaking in those ways and developing coaching, one-on-one coaching opportunities. And then there's been this pull for a course, and the course will come as well, because some people won't want to sit with me personally, but they want to work through these things like I did, like years on their own at a self-pace. So I pulled all those things together so that no one has to go 10 years to kind of get this process. And then the book, there's a stepwise way to it. So that's
Okay.
it. Thank you for asking.
You're welcome. And your right now your Instagram is scrolling down at the bottom of the screen, as well as your
Yeah.
website. And I
Yeah.
will share a little commentary that was going on in the comments. That was funny.
Oh,
I think this was
okay.
about 10 or 15 minutes ago. You must have said Duke again. And one of my fellow Carolina alums said, "We'll forgive her."
Thank you so much.
Well,
But
Dr.
yes.
V, thank you so much for hanging out with us tonight on this Friday edition. Just bringing it all home this week, as I was talking before bringing you on, kind of like reviewing what the week has been. I've learned a lot, but I hope that people who have seen the broadcast, whether live or the replay, that something has been shared that will positively impact their life, or something that they can share with someone else. Definitely, because it
You
is.
gave us so much. You gave us so many points of entry, and you serve the whole self. And I don't take it lightly that I'm here. I really am honored, because I see you as a shepherd of sorts, that you're very particular about what you present to people and what you expose people to, and what you participate in. So I don't take that lightly as well. So everyone, catch all the replays. I'm still taking notes, even from last week with some of the recipes. I love it. Um, that's how we move forward. So much love and honor to you.
Thank you, darling. Thank you. And
Yes.
yeah, we'll I'm sure in the future there'll be another opportunity for us to do something again on the show, because you just have such a vast amount of knowledge that yeah, I'm sure you'll be back. We might have
Oh,
to,
thank
I've had
you.
a few members of Delta Sigma Theta on the show. Who knows? We might have to have Delta Week. Who knows?
Come on now.
Everybody,
Why not? Why not?
why
That's a
would be
that's
too.
that's rich right there. Cornucopia of majesty.
Absolutely, absolutely. All right.
Thank
Well, enjoy
you.
the rest
Thank
of
you
your
all.
evening. Again, thank you for being here.
You too. And you have a restful week.
I am going to do my
Yes.
best. That is the goal. That is definitely the goal. Have a good
All
night.
right. You too. Bye.
All right, that is it for this Friday edition of the Angela Ray Show. As always, I would like to remind you of Ray of Motivation, number 54. Cleaning a mirror does not change the person who is reflected in it. Until next time, I encourage you to go out and be the change. Have a great weekend.